Welcome to Measuring Success Right, the official podcast of the Marriott Student Review, a podcast for students by students, where we connect the leaders of tomorrow with the issues of today.
It wasn't until then that I looked back and thought, look at how far I've come. That was a huge success, even at the end of my junior core and before I started that job.
Welcome everyone to this new episode of Measuring Success Right. My name is Abbie and I am excited to get to interview Dr. Mark Keith today. So Dr. Keith is an associate professor in the Information Systems Department within the Marriott School of Business at BYU. He graduated from BYU with his Master's of Information Systems Management and then continued his education by earning a PhD in Business Administration from Arizona State University in 2009. Before coming to BYU, he held positions at the University of Alabama and West Texas A&M University. And as a former student of his, I'm excited to get to talk to him today. Dr. Keith, welcome. We're excited to have you.
Thanks so much. Looking forward to it.
So, Dr. Keith, starting off, we want to focus this interview on information systems, and a lot of our listeners are BYU students as well as others, but we wanted to highlight specific majors within the Marriott School of Business. And I think a lot of people don't know very much about information systems, and so through this interview, they'll be able to learn a little bit more, so we're excited for that. And first of all, I think maybe some people might not know how cool information systems can be. Do you have any exciting experiences that you've had recently that relate to information systems that you could share with listeners?
Oh, recent experiences. Well, I've had a lot of experiences. I think what I like about IS is it's about solving unstructured problems with technology, specifically business problems, right? These are things that you can't program to be automated. And those are the types of problems that are less interesting to solve anyway. And what I like about IS is that the problems change and the solutions change too constantly because the technology changes. So I find myself constantly amazed at what's possible. Things that I would never have thought possible. I know about them years before the average consumer does because we're using them to solve problems, and that just makes it really exciting. So I'll go home and tell my wife or tell my friends or tell others about this new technology that's come out and here's what it can do. And oftentimes I'll get blank stares like, I don't understand what you're talking about. And then 10 years later, they're like, wow, look what this can do. I can have a phone in my pocket and it knows everything about me. We were talking about this years before it was mainstream consumer information. So I like IS because it's really great to see what's possible and how that changes quickly over time.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm an information systems major, so I also like that it combines the analytical, more decision making, but also it's people, it's integrating that into business and into people's lives. And going back, I'm curious how you chose information systems. You graduated from BYU in information systems. What was your path that led you there?
Yeah, I remember I was this naive missionary, and I remember at one point seeing this other missionary use this new program called Excel. And I was like, Excel, what's that? And I just messed with spreadsheets a little bit. I'm like, wow, is this what computer scientists do? And I thought, I'm going to go do computer science. And then I had a good mentor, my mission president, who when I was ready to go home said, what are you going to do? What are you going to study? And I said, computer science. He said, no, you're not. You're going to go into business management. You're going to get an MBA. And so that was my compromise between the two of them. It was information systems gave me the best of both of those worlds, but I still knew very little about it. But I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So when I was ready to start, I planned out my 120 credits to graduate. And I finished with 120 and a half credits because back then we had to take 3 PE classes, which were only a half credit each. So if I could have graduated at 120, I would have, but I just got really focused and my plan was just to do an undergrad and then go on. But I came out in the job market in 2001, 2002 after the dot-com bubble had burst and the job market was terrible. And even though I had a really good GPA, I couldn't even get a sniff of an interview. It was just so bad at that time. And so I'm like, well, I guess I'll just do this master's program, which I didn't really want to do. So I did the MISM. And I was trying to finish it all in 1 year so I could get right back out again. And the job market was still bad, but it was better. I remember my dad asking me if I thought about getting a PhD. Now, he was a geology professor and an administrator here. BYU for a long time. And I always thought if there's one thing I'll never do, it's get a PhD, because I just, geology wasn't my field, and I associated what he did with that. Anyway, as often happens, the Lord knew better for me, because in order to finish graduating in 1 year, I needed to take one more class that I couldn't fit anywhere into my schedule. It was impossible. And I was sort of frustrated that I was going to have to take an extra semester just for one class. So then one night, I'm on my laptop working, and I remember my wife's next to me, and I get an email from a professor here, Paul Lowry, who's since left BYU, but one of our great faculty. He sent out an email saying, we've got this new research class that I'm starting a pre-PhD program here to prepare students to go get PhDs. And I remember looking at that email and literally laughing out loud and telling my wife about it. I'm like, yeah, there's no way I'd take this, until I noticed the time and date on that class was the only time that would fit into my schedule. And so I was like, oh, okay, I guess this is it. But I'm going to take this class ironically. I'm going to hate every minute of it, and I'm just going to do it only for the credit, and I'll be really sarcastic about the whole thing. And it only took me about 2 weeks into the class before I was like, oh, this is different. I got to do this. This is so cool, because it's all about creating new knowledge and information systems. So how do we learn more about solving problems than we can find in a textbook? How do we go beyond what any textbook can offer and create new knowledge in this area? And so that's what got me into the PhD. So I went to ASU to do that, and I've loved everything I've done since. I couldn't imagine a better career for myself. I wouldn't change a thing.
That's amazing. Yeah. I remember you sharing in the class I took from you a little bit about your research, and it's just cool how the different things you can do. I remember it. I mean, maybe you could explain a little bit more about that too, but determining how groups best work together based on personality and displaying those results, and that blew my mind. So it's awesome.
I appreciate you saying that. Some people I talk to about my research, and it would put them to sleep at night, but other people just get it, and you can tell they're one of your people. Yeah, you're an IS person like me, or a researcher like me. It's just it's a lot of fun. So yeah, that particular project was a fun one because it was directly applicable and motivated by improving our classroom experience. Now, what's interesting is a lot of the research universities I've taught at or worked at before, they don't reward that type of research. They want faculty who publish in A-journal publications and don't really worry about what happens in the classroom. BYU is very not like that. And as a student here, I took that for granted because I didn't have any other experiences. I didn't know that. It wasn't until I left to go work on my PhD that I realized that not all schools care just about how good the quality is in the classroom. And I remember taking classes. One was from a Nobel Prize winning economist who would start class, and we had whiteboards on 270 degrees of the classroom. And he would start working on a problem over on the top left corner of the first whiteboard. And it would take him all 75 minutes to work through proving that theorem until he got to the other side and worked through all 270 degrees of whiteboard. Then you get down to the very end and say, and the answer is 7, but I guess the book says it's 4. Anyway, figure out where I went wrong. The test is going to be next week. And it was just this impossible to succeed scenario unless you just put in mountains of your own work. So I liked BYU because they do expect us to publish in A-quality journals, and we do. But they also are willing to reward and support very classroom-focused research. So as you know, the project that I give Dr. Greg Anderson credit for starting and for having the motivation and kind of idea to do this, but we want to do a better job of how we built our teams to improve learning. And learning, of course, that's the most important outcome measure in school or in the university, but we do a pretty poor job of measuring learning. And so what we did was we took a measure I had created to be a better outcome measure for both students and professionals of an information systems person. They're sort of a measure of success or of quality for them. And we used that measure, which was more about self-efficacy, which we defined that as our confidence in our ability to do something. And in particular, in information systems, we defined it as our confidence in our ability to solve business problems with information technology. So that measure, it's a series of survey questions about our confidence in our ability to do X, Y, Z. And I set about defining what X, Y, and Z was. Did that with a few other authors. This occurred about 3 or 4 years ago. We got that published in one of our top 2 conferences. It won Best Paper Award. We were really excited about that one. And then we used that measure over in this project to determine how do we put teams together. So we start out the semester by measuring personality and culture. And in addition, we measured sort of a starting or baseline of what we called this self-efficacy or creative self-efficacy. We call it CREASE for short. So it's our confidence in our ability to creatively solve unstructured technology problems, blah, blah, blah. And anyway, so we measured everyone's CREASE, and then we created these teams based on what your personalities were. So we measured 5 dimensions of personality from the Big Five model, as well as 6 dimensions of culture. And culture at the individual level is a lot like personality. It's a very similar concept, but there's the sort of the world-renowned author on that, Hofstede. I don't even know if I'm even saying his name right, but it's I've drawn from him a long time. He defines these 6 dimensions, and so we measured those 11 factors at the beginning of the semester as well. And then we thought, well, how are we going to build teams out of this? Now, we pulled up the academic research, which there was a lot on, and even on the topic of building software development teams, where they studied personality and culture. And all the research really said that was useful was that highly agreeable people and less neurotic people made for more higher performing teams. Well, that didn't really help, because you can't just take all of the highly agreeable and low neurotic people and put them on one team at the expense of all the others. It's a zero-sum game, right? You hurt other teams when you do that. So we thought, let's look at it a bit differently in terms of the heterogeneity of the teams. And what that means is we said, all right, is it better for learning to put people of similar personalities together or different personalities? And so there was some research we found on that topic, although quite a bit less, and nothing in our context of student learning around information systems or anything like in the software development realm as well, at least very little. And so we thought, let's be the first then, or one of the first to experiment on this. And so we randomly assigned students. This was about 5 years ago we started, it would have been 3 or 4 years ago, I guess. Anyway, we randomly assigned students to either teams of very different personalities or very similar personalities. And we found that in the first semester, teams of very similar personalities outperformed teams of different personalities. Now, when I say outperformed, what does that mean? It did not mean grades. We actually looked at grades, and there was 0 difference between the grades of the 2 groups, which that reflects poorly on us as professors. But what we did see was a difference in creative self-efficacy improvement. So we measured it at the beginning of the semester and at the end, and students' confidence in their ability to solve business problems with technology increased much more when they were similar. Well, we kept them in similar teams the next semester, and what happened? It flipped. The teams of similar personalities, their performance increase slowed down while the teams of different personalities sped up. And by the end, they all caught up to the same place. Well, that was interesting because we needed to explain that. And as we dug more into the prior research, we found that, that similarity effect only happens when you're learning content that's new to the learner, that they're not familiar with. As soon as they get more mature and they know their domain a bit better and they're solving more difficult problems, it's actually heterogeneous teams that perform better. That minor conflict that comes from having different backgrounds and different cultural traits, that makes a big difference. And I think that has a lot to do with the research in IS that's shown that management teams that are formed from a combination of both men and women seem to outperform the teams of those that are made up of just men. And so we thought, great, let's get the best of both worlds. So we learned from that, and we put students in teams in the first semester of the same personalities for everybody. And then in the second semester, we mixed it all up and put everybody in teams of different personalities. And we've done that repeatedly over years, and we found that sure enough, we do get better effects overall when we do that than if we do anything else. And so that's been a lot of fun and probably more of an explanation than you were looking for on that topic.
Oh, no, that's intriguing to me. I also have an interest in psychology, and so that is kind of a mix of these 2 worlds. So it's really intriguing, and I'm in the second semester of the junior core right now, and so I've kind of been observing my own group and asking friends about their groups and seeing kind of how things are going. So it's really
guess
interesting.
Who's like you and who's different from you. Yeah, that's the fun part.
It's interesting, but it's awesome that you do that. I mean, it helps students, right? It's so that we can be more confident, and so that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think that measure is an important one because it's based on this idea of self-learning or learning theory or self-efficacy theory from Bandura from back in the late 70s until now. He just showed that our confidence in our ability to solve a problem often is a much better indicator of our actual performance than our actual ability to solve a problem. So in other words, you get people who are very capable but have low confidence in themselves, and then they end up performing worse than those who are not as capable but have high confidence in themselves. And that's the reason for that is because what that confidence does for us is it causes us to persist. When times get hard, when we're learning something or doing something that's very difficult, if I'm confident I can do it, I'm going to go to Google and search for help. I'll go to Stack Exchange and search for help. I'll go to YouTube. Whereas the person who's not confident, there may be the most minor bug or problem in their way from finishing that project, but because they have low confidence, they give up immediately and they want to go talk to their professor, which is great. That's what we're here for. But there's also 200 other students that want to talk to us. And I shouldn't admit this, but every once in a while, depending on how much I know about a student, I might get an email and intentionally not respond for just a little bit, just long enough to where about a day later or 2 days later, I'll respond and say, how you doing on this problem? I just got around to being able to help. And they'll tell me, I fixed it like half hour after I emailed you. Sorry, you can just ignore that. And I'm like, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's not, it's not a standard practice. Usually as I get to know students a little bit better, I'll kind of make those intentional decisions. But definitely the other end of the extreme spectrum is I'll get some students who will spend 20 hours working on something that they're just not going to get unless they get some help. So there's a certain degree of self-efficacy that maybe if it gets too far, it can actually do some damage perhaps, but we haven't studied that. I can't say for sure. But for all the students listening, don't spend 20 hours on a homework assignment that should take 2 hours. If you get to 2 hours and you're still not done, that's when you stop and go to your professor or TA.
Yeah, the optimum level of self-efficacy then.
Yep, that's right.
And just a couple more questions for you, Dr. Keith. What's your opinion about some challenging aspects of the information systems industry, and how can students prepare now to meet those challenges as they enter the workforce?
Sure. Yeah. I occasionally I'll do some consulting work for a local company, and I'm actually working on a project now for one that it's an interesting problem. It's unlike any other problem I've taught in the classroom. So if I'm a student, in fact, I thought about this. I'm like, if I'm a student that took my class and now I'm working for this company working on this problem, what am I going to do? And the truth is we've been working on this since January, and we've failed multiple times. Now, if I had failed and thought, okay, I can't do this job, it's time for me to switch careers, that would have been the worst possible thing I could have done, because you know what? Now we've come up with a solution that's really cool and unlike anything else that we've done. We would never have done that if we weren't okay with failure. Now, I know that's easy for me to say as a professor because I'm not the one being graded. You can't fail your classes. But what it means is, those high-performing students who are so used to getting 4.0s, it's okay to get an A-. It's even okay to get a B+. It's even okay to get a B. And if it's lower than that, it still just depends. It's on a class-by-class basis, right? Do I need this? Do I need it better than a C or not? My point is, it's okay to not do as well as you'd like to the first time at everything, because if you're not okay with that, it's going to lead you to quit something that would be so worth your time and so valuable. In fact, far more valuable. If we only do the things that we're already good at, by nature, you're not going to learn very fast or learn very much. So what I liked about this consulting job is it's been exactly what my students are going to do in practice. And it tells me that I've got to be someone who's okay with trying something and having it not work. And that personality type just excels in information systems, and I guess in most disciplines.
Yeah, that's great advice. And that actually leads to our final question. This podcast is called Measuring Success, right? Where we ask guests about their definition of success, because I think a lot of times we as students have that misconstrued view as we have to get all A's or we have to get 100% on this exam or whatever it be. But how would you measure success, Dr. Keith?
No, that's a great question. So I know this is the same answer you've heard from a lot of people. And that just tells you that it's probably very accurate. You have to measure in terms of your improvement, right? When I first started IS, I had something like a 3.97 GPA. I was doing really well. And I remember applying to both accounting and IS at the same time, but thinking, no, I'm going to do IS. So I did that, even though IS 201 was a little bit harder for me than Accounting 200 was. Accounting 200 was like, I could do that one in my sleep, but IS 201 made me think a little bit. And so I did it anyway. And that first semester in the junior core destroyed my GPA, just absolutely ruined it. But where I came from was far lower than where the average student came from, because I had no friends, no family members who had ever been in this field before. I had nobody that I could reach out to and say, can you show me how to do this or fix this little minor programming bug? There were TAs, but back then I remember going in and you put your name on the list on the whiteboard for help. And depending on what time you get in there, my work schedule would only allow me to get there a certain time. And I was like 52nd on the list. And after 3 hours, there were still 30 people ahead of me. I don't think I ever once got TA help that semester. But, as I look back on that semester, at my junior core year, I was so disappointed with what had happened to my GPA that I didn't realize how far I had come. I didn't realize that, I started way lower than anybody else. And now I'm an average student. Yeah, I'm not anywhere near the top of this class, but I bet I improved as much or more than anybody else in the junior core. So what did I do? I started thinking about switching to another major like most students do, and things get hard. And then I thought, all right, you know what? No, I'm going to do whatever it takes to apply and get some sort of job to just practice what I'm doing. Now, there were no good internships at that time that anyone could get because of the job market, but I went around to every entry-level web development, programming job possible on campus and basically put on like a song and a dance show to try and convince them how excited I was to get a job. And eventually I did get one at BYU Broadcasting. I remember my boss, Wendy, who hired me, I asked her why she hired me, and she said, you were just too darn enthusiastic to send away. It's like, I could tell you knew very little. But she's like, I knew if I gave you the resources, you'd figure it out and go really far. And that's exactly what I did. I learned so much in that job, working only 20 hours, sometimes 10 hours a week, that when I came back and did the MISM, I was light years ahead of most of my peers. It wasn't until then that I looked back and thought, look at how far I've come. That was a huge success, even at the end of my junior core and before I started that job. So being willing to know that we all kind of bloom at different times. I could tell the same story with my PhD. I remember applying with something like 15 to 18 other people at the same time, and I was the lowest placed of all the other students. I went to ASU, which I thought was terrible, but was actually a top 15 school at the time. But these others were going to top 5 schools. I'm like, I guess I'm done. But I ended up being incredibly successful in academia too. And I just kind of bloomed a bit later, but I came a long way, and I see it as a huge success.
Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. I relate to that story a little bit in terms of feeling like I know nothing and then wanting to switch majors, but I'm sticking it out and I'm seeing that I'm learning a lot, and I think that's even more rewarding than just getting an A or getting a good GPA. It's the learning that counts.
I can tell you're going to be successful. That really is, that having that attitude, that's often a better indicator of success than anything else.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Keith. Thanks everyone for listening, and have a great week.
Awesome. See ya.
Make sure you subscribe to our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or SoundCloud so you never miss an episode. Be a friend and tell a friend about measuring success right.
This podcast is a project of the Marriott Student Review at Brigham Young University. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Marriott Student Review or online at marriottstudentreview.org.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect official policy or position of Brigham Young University or The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.